This is Tyrese Halliburton, and you're listening to Setting the Pace.
Pacer Nation, what is going on? It's been a hot minute, but we are back, ladies and gentlemen. We are here for some Pacers talk here on your favorite Pacers podcast, Setting the Pace. Facci is joining me today. Hopefully my mic is loud enough. I've been getting complaints about my mic not being loud enough on the YouTube
That
channel.
comment.
So, does it sound better?
It sounds perfect. I don't think we're going to get any complainers, but you never know. There tends to be one. And hey, we encourage it. That's how you guys make the show better. So if you see something, you hear something, call it out. We'll address it.
I'll try to speak a little bit louder, and if I'm too loud, I can always adjust the volume for the next time. But with that being said, me and Facci are going to be Iron Men tonight because we are recording this on Monday, July 29th, and we are going to record 6 episodes today as we are speaking. So we are going to be knocking out 6 episodes because you guys sent in over 30 mailbag questions. We held it at 230. Some of them were kind of the same questions. So we're going to keep it to 30. So that means we're going to have 6 mailbag episodes, 5 questions each. And you guys did a good job asking about certain players that it was kind of nice to be able to specifically, hone in on those players and those topics and just focus on that solely. There's some other stuff sprinkled in here and there, but I think you guys are going to like this setup. So we're going to start things out today, Facci, with our first segment, and this is the James Wiseman category. It is kind of interesting how a minimum signing has gained this much traction throughout the offseason.
It's funny because there's more James Wiseman questions than there was Tyrese Halliburton or Pascal Siakam questions. It's crazy how it works out that way, but it is definitely true. That's why James Wiseman has his own category in the mailbag today.
Yeah, well, let's get things started with Devin. Devin is, I don't know if Devin's ever sent a question, but this is at base Devin0. He said, do you think Wiseman will rebound and have a decent season this year, or is he truly a draft bust?
Well, Devin, are you talking about rebounding like crashing the glass or bouncing back? No, I'm just kidding. Look, I imagine that you're talking about having like a bounce back year, and I think that he can. Now, it all depends, though, is like, what do you consider a decent season for James Wiseman? I don't think he's going to be putting up numbers, but, there's a real scenario where Ajax holds it down as the backup center and Wiseman's playing that third center role sparingly. And I think at that point, you're kind of just hoping in limited minutes, could he hold his own? I do think that he's going to be set up to succeed in Indiana with the coaching staff, with this explosive offense, but minutes are far from a guaranteed. So I would love for this to be the rejuvenation of his career, but I don't think that you're going to be expecting him to put up 8 points and 5 rebounds next year by any means.
I think it's going to be hard for him opportunity-wise to really showcase too much with, like you said, Isaiah Jackson Turner being ahead of him. But I do think he's going to get opportunities, and I think that's part of the reason why he wanted to come here. Now, I will say this. I was watching social media, going through reels and stuff like that, and I don't even know what the podcast was, but they were talking about Steve Kerr as a head coach. And they were kind of talking about his limitations with what he does as a coach, how he's kind of put in this little box and he can only coach a certain way. And that's kind of why you're seeing Team USA being ran the way they're being ran, is because he can only coach a certain way. So he has to put certain players in certain spots for that specific system. And they felt like James Wiseman was more than just a lob threat, and that Steve Kerr had no idea what to do with James Wiseman. And so that he kind of ruined his career a little bit in Golden State because he didn't know how to use him. And then obviously goes to Detroit, and Detroit's just a hot mess, and they had invested more money in Jalen Duren as a top 10 draft pick. So it did make a lot of sense for James Wiseman to move on from Detroit. But, I mean, there were moments in Detroit, I think Chris Teneri brought this up last week, that there were some really nice moments. There were some big pops from James Wiseman with Detroit. So I may have been more dismissive of it early on, but I do think that if he gets in the right system and Carlisle feels like he can kind of, not cater to his needs, but kind of put him in the right spot to magnify what he does well, I think there is a good spot from here. So I don't think he's a draft bust. He might be a draft bust in the sense that, he was drafted, second overall, right? So that might be where he's a bust because he doesn't ever live up to that potential. But how many players do we see not even make it in the league after their first rookie contract that get drafted that high? So it kind of happens frequently. So I'll just say this. I think that he's got potential, and I would say that he's probably better than a guy like Marvin Bagley III, in my opinion. So
no, I agree with that. I just think he's not going to have a guaranteed role, and that's why we can't just say, oh yeah, he's going to put up X, Y, and Z for stats. So I think that he's going to have to work for everything. But just to put things in perspective, Isaiah Jackson last year was behind Jalen Smith. Isaiah Jackson outworked Jalen Smith in that second half of the year and took that backup spot. Anything could happen in this scenario. It's up to James Wiseman to put in the work.
Well, let's go to the next question here, Facci.
Next question. This is from Travis. He said, who do you think gets backup center minutes, Jackson or Wiseman?
Yeah, so we kind of already addressed this, obviously, by saying that Isaiah Jackson is the leading man going into it. But like you just mentioned, last year was the same situation. In fact, I believe there was conversation that even had from the guys that had basically said, well, actually, at one point, they had Jalen and Ijax running the 4 and the 5 together with the second unit, with how they had kind of made the rotations originally. Obviously, Nembhard was with the second unit as the point guard. McConnell was on the third string team. I'm trying to remember who was the 2 and 3 at that. Neesmith was in there at the 3 as a backup, and I forget who the 2 was. So maybe that's where they had McConnell and Nembhard there together, and we're trying to figure things out with like Tice and obviously you got guys like what am I blanking? Jarris and Shepard who were not in there. My dog is barking if you can hear that. Sorry.
Good.
But anyway, he always does this when I get on the podcast, like laying in his bed completely fine while I'm watching TV. I go on the podcast and I want to start squeaking his toy and barking. But regardless, a lot of weird combinations last year early on at the beginning of training camp and preseason. Everything kind of ironed itself out. But Jalen Smith ended up beating Isaiah Jackson. So I would say it's Isaiah Jackson's to lose. But if James Wiseman outplays him in the preseason, I would not be shocked if Rick Carlisle gives him an opportunity to keep that spot if he earns it in preseason.
I mean, I remember we were talking about it. I was honestly kind of disgusted by Isaiah Jackson's summer league play last year. I thought he did nothing to be able to earn that backup job. And in the end, it was like Jalen started out really strong. We looked at him. He's like, whoa, physically, he looks completely different. The 3 ball was electric. And then just little by little, Isaiah Jackson just gave you really good minutes whenever he got a chance. Anything could happen for James Wiseman. I think he's going to have a massive chip on his shoulder. I think he's going to be working harder than he's probably ever worked before. He's going to be on a winning team again. Anything could happen second half of the year, but it's definitely Isaiah Jackson's spot to lose. And, from there, the Pacers have a lot to determine. Turner, last year of his contract, Isaiah Jackson, set to hit restricted free agency. This is a really big opportunity for James Wiseman, but for right now, he's definitely third in the pecking order as it relates to those center minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think they like him too, based on what Chris Neri said. I mean, he said that the front office and people in the organization really like James Wiseman's potential, and they clearly like everybody from the 2020 draft, right?
Everybody.
So, I don't know. Maybe they're a little bit higher on him than we think, and maybe he could do more than what we're expecting. Just trying to keep my expectations realistic, Fletch. I don't want to I don't want to get myself too excited, overhype myself up for James Wiseman, because some of the highlights, some of the flashes you see, you're like, man, there is a good player in here, but it's just you haven't really seen it on a consistent level. So I do like what Isaiah Jackson did show last year, especially coming into the playoffs. Really felt like he held his own. And one thing I like about Isaiah Jackson is he seems really chippy and not afraid of anyone. And so I kind of want to know how James Wiseman handles that tough guy mentality, because that is one thing I liked about Isaiah Jackson in that Knicks series. It was, a little bit rough around the edges, right? There was not any dirty plays, I don't think, but I did like his hard screen on Dante DiVincenzo that leveled him out, even if DiVincenzo did flop a little bit. I think that Isaiah did throw a little extra umph in there with his shoulder, right? Threw a little more into it, but that's what I like about Ajax, and I feel like when we get excited about Wiseman, we do dismiss what Ajax does so well. But Ajax really stepped up last year in his role for the limited minutes that he had. Still don't think his role is one that you're going to freak out about if it's not one of those long-term things. But, I think Wiseman, I think he has a chance to push Jackson to make it more of a competition than maybe we thought early on.
Yeah, this is Isaiah Jackson's 4th year going into, as an Indiana Pacer. He's got familiarity with, the coaching staff, the team, everything of the sort. And I think that gives him that level up, but it's not just he's being handed it. He earned it with his play. I think James Wiseman is yet to earn it. He's got to earn his spot. That's why he's on a minimum contract. And I think at this point, hey, his play needs to do the talking. What do you got next?
All right, this comes from Samuel Culbertson. He wants to know, what is the ceiling for James Wiseman?
The ceiling, I mean, look, it's a great question. I think right now, I don't want to say ceiling long term is different than ceiling for next year. Ceiling for next year feels like winning the backup center position. I still think he could have a higher ceiling in the league, but that roof is lowering a little bit. You could hit your head on it right now. So here's the thing. Like I said, Turner set to hit free agency. Isaiah Jackson, not a guarantee if he is brought back. So, I mean, could James Wiseman be a starting center in this league? Maybe. Right now, no. But I think that right now, James Wiseman has just a lot to prove before we could say, oh, he could start on this team or that team, because we looked at it. He was on the Detroit Pistons, the worst team in the league. Wasn't working out. So I think for right now, short term, his ceiling is the backup center.
Yeah, it's a tough question here because I'm trying to figure out I'm trying to think of a comparison for a player in the league that would make a lot of sense, because there's players out there you're like, okay, they really did kind of step their game up a little bit. Good backup center, kind of makes you feel good about it. The first thing that came to mind was Daniel Gafford from the Wizards.
Well,
Right.
I mean, that would be great if he could end up being a Daniel Gafford, because I feel like Gafford has a role right now where it's like he's a really good rim protector that made the Dallas Mavericks better and was starting on an NBA Finals team. So that would be
Didn't
awesome.
Derek Lively start over him?
Yeah, he was starting, but I think they were both starting together, I think, at one point.
Okay, maybe I'm mistaken, but I was thinking, Derek Lively kind of won that spot from Gafford. Gafford kind of showed his limitations. Here's a better one to kind of make it Pacers related. Could it be the Jan Mahimi of the Indiana Pacers, right? Because Jan Mahimi was brought in. He ended up being the third string center at one point because they brought Andrew Bynum in. Things didn't work out, but Jan Mahimi was a good backup center with the Dallas Mavericks, right? Ended up getting traded to Indiana, was a good backup center for the Pacers, even started for them a little bit, got paid quite a bit of money to go to Washington in the 2016-17 season. So I just feel like his ceiling right now is like a very high quality backup big. It's just going to take some time to get there. I mean, obviously, like if you look at it from this perspective, Facci, in the same draft class that he's in, look at all the max deals that have gone out to players that were drafted in that lottery. You got like 6 or 7 guys off the top of my head that probably got max deals or close to it in that group. And here he is in his final year of his rookie deal, signing a minimum contract with the Pacers. So he's got a long way to go, but I do think that the ceiling is still there. I just don't think it's ever going to be all-star starter, star potential kind of guy. But I do think that he can carve himself a rollout in this league and be a nice backup. So that's where I'm at with James Wiseman. I feel like we've talked quite a bit about him. Are you ready to move on?
I am. So next question this is coming from Marc Goldsticker. He said, what is your prediction for the center rotation in 2025, 2026? So, Alex, just when you thought you were done with James Wiseman, you really aren't. What do you got?
No, we're not. And this is where it does get kind of interesting, because you gotta wonder, is Myles Turner on this team or not, Facci? And I think there is a good reason why I think he is more than he's not, because I just don't think there's a lot of teams out there next year that are going to have cap space that he's going to go to. So I think the Spurs are a team that could make some sense to me. I know they have Wembanyama, but I think Wemby and Myles could play together. I think that they're going to have cap space. He's from Texas. That does make a little bit of sense to me. I know Utah's another team that could have cap space. They don't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I'm trying to remember off the top of my head like who the other teams are right now that have that cap space. But to me, there's not a lot of great teams that have cap space that makes sense for Myles to leave Indiana. I think Washington's another one. They might have, a decent fit for him there, but like, does he want to go to Washington or does he want to win here in Indiana and take maybe a bit of a pay cut? I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but like you look at a team like Brooklyn, they're another team that's going to have cap space. They just signed Nick Claxton. So I'm just going off the top of my head. Like he's not one. I don't think he's at that point where he wants to go to a rebuilding team.
I don't
The
think
only
so either.
rebuilding team I could see him maybe going to, like I mentioned earlier, is San Antonio, just because of the fact that they have Wemby and they could start winning right away. They got some high draft picks, whatever. So that could make some sense. Go back to Texas if the Pacers don't want to give him the money that he deserves or that he feels he deserves. But I think you got to bank in Turner as your starting center in 25, 26. Don't know what the length of that contract's going to be, but I do think that at the end of the day, it is interesting to watch. But I do expect him to re-sign with Indiana next offseason. Right now, at this point, as we're talking on July 29th, And then I would say that there's a good chance, in my opinion, that James Wiseman is the backup center and Isaiah Jackson is not on this roster. But we've kind of seen how the new CBA has made things really hard with that second apron. Look at a guy like Isaac Okoro. He's potentially going to be, I think they're in talks right now with Cleveland for sign and trade with the Brooklyn Nets to maybe get them Dorian Finney-Smith. So there's some stuff going on there, but it's like these guys that are decent players, they're not going to get a lot of money because there's not a big market out there for them. And does Indiana really want to pay them that much? So I feel bad for these guys. I feel like it's kind of like, woo, where are we going to go from here? But I don't know. I just feel like Jackson, they could bring him back, but I bank on probably Wiseman being the backup center, and then you draft somebody.
Yeah, those middle tier guys are kind of getting squeezed out. We just saw Tyus Jones sign essentially a minimum deal with Phoenix. I mean, Tyus Jones is a solid player in this league. Gary Trent Jr. signed a minimum contract as well. I mean, those are guys that have produced.
Yeah.
They're worth more than minimum deals. But yeah, it gets tough. And then you look at just for Turner, like you talked about, the center market. There's not a lot of teams that are A, going to have a lot of money to spend, and B, are also looking to spend it on a center. But like I said, the second Isaiah Hartenstein signed that deal at about $29 million per year, it just felt like it raised Myles Turner's value. So the Pacers, if they're going to bring Turner back, they have some really tough decisions to make. I think one of those decisions is obviously, hey, if you're going to bring Turner back, you're also not paying Isaiah Jackson in restricted free agency.
Maybe.
So it's really hard for me. I just don't know how they're going to bring Turner back right now, because the Pacers would have to agree to be a second apron team, bringing back the same roster, and that's going to be hard to justify. Of course, that one player that you would have to go into the second apron for is the guy that's the most tenured Pacer. That's what makes it that much harder. So I might be on the opposite end. I might say that Turner might not be back with the team, and then it could be, do you bring back Isaiah Jackson, and then do you bring back James Wiseman? Here's the thing. I still don't feel comfortable in either of them being our starting center. So I can't give you a great answer on this question. I just think that if the Pacers feel that they cannot bring Myles Turner back, I just hope they get ahead of it and try and do some sort of either a deal at the deadline or a sign and trade to bring back another center. Because for right now, I don't feel comfortable in Isaiah Jackson playing 30 minutes a night. I just don't. He's gotten better in cutting down the fouls, but I don't think he's capable of playing 30 minutes a night. And I don't think that James Wiseman is anywhere even near ready to play that much minutes. I don't even think the two of them are ready to play 25 a night each, or 24 each, anything like that.
And that to me is what makes Myles so valuable.
I agree.
The center market feels pretty dry right now. If you look on the market, like there's not a lot of players out there that you're like, ooh, I want them as a center. There's been a couple of teams you could throw out there for trades, but like at that point, it's just like Myles fits so much better than everybody else. Like, and I kind of wonder how close they will be to the second apron, because we don't have the numbers yet. It's all projections still, right? And they did get Nembhard on his friendlier deal than letting him sign a bigger deal. So you'll have, Siakam and Halliburton's contract going down. You will have Nembhard's jump quite a bit from 2 to 15 or 2 to 17.8, whatever it is. So it's a $15 million jump basically. And then McConnell's contract is a big thing to look at too, just because Indiana basically could say, look, TJ, we want to bring you back, but the money just ain't there for what it could have been 2 or 3 years ago before the new CBA. So are you willing to take a little bit of a pay cut or kind of stay around the same amount of money? Are you looking for a massive pay, jump, pay raise where all of a sudden you become unaffordable? And I think if you're picking between who's more worth paying for your team moving forward, McConnell or Turner, I think you have to lean Turner. Even though McConnell is a very fun backup point guard, there's just you're taking such a step back, I think, at the center position if you lose Myles and don't really replace that.
Here's what I got for you. Here is the unrestricted centers that are going to be, free agents next year. Myles Turner's hands down the best center that will be on the market. Then after that, the drop off next is Clint Capella, Brook Lopez, Steven Adams, Zubac, Al Horford probably retires, Kevon Looney. Do I even need to say DeAndre Jordan? I mean, at this point, it's just like there is such a he might not be after next year, but there is such a drop off after Turner that I don't think the Pacers would really feel comfortable signing and rolling with really any of those players if it's going to be anywhere even close to the value. Like you bring in Clint Capella, everything's changed. I mean, he cannot do anything of what, Turner could do. Brooke Lopez is going to be 37, 38 years old.
We're
I
gonna
mean,
love
that's not
Brooke
going to be an
Lopez in
option.
this system.
Exactly. So it's like Turner or bust. So I really don't know what the Pacers will do, but they're going to have to figure something out pretty quick.
Yeah, the only thing they could potentially do is make a trade.
That's it.
And that's potential. That's a possibility. It is. It definitely is a possibility. But I'm not gonna bank on that. I think Turner's back, and I think it's one of Wiseman or Jackson that gets the backup minutes and go from there. But let's move on, Facci. Our last question here.
This is from CF, or on Twitter, he's C Falcon 31. He said, "Do we have the future starting small forward on this current roster, or are they coming from elsewhere? If Turner re-signs next offseason, that should lock in 4 starters."
Yeah. So to address that, I would agree. You're gonna have Siakam, Turner, now Nimhart, who just got extended, and Halliburton. I don't know why I'm forgetting about him.
Can't
I
forget
guess.
about the franchise. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think Steve Kerr's forgetting about him has made me forget about him. So. Anyway, I'm kidding, obviously. But no, I definitely think that with the small forward spot, it is up in the air right now. Aaron Nesmith is a great, fill-in for that spot, but I do not believe that Aaron Nesmith is the long-term answer at the starting small forward position, even though I do love his game as a player. Like, I'm glad he's a pacer. I think that is Benedict Mathurin's, starting spot to gain. Can he go out there and grab it? I don't think Jarris Walker is ready anytime soon. So it could be one of those things where, like, hey, this is where the Pacers make that consolidation trade to go out there and get that small forward that they've long coveted for a while. I mean, yeah, they've got a lot of undersized players because Mathurin's still pretty undersized for that small forward position if you're really looking at it from that, perspective where you want a little bit more of a longer, rangy guy. So I think that if I'm Indiana, I want to see what I have internally. But I kind of feel like if Mathurin or Jarris doesn't take a massive step forward in the next 2 or 3 years, then I think they got to start looking somewhere else.
Yeah, that's the thing. You can make an argument to say, do they have 2 or 3 years to wait on them to develop? Because it might not have great trade value by then. But to answer the question, I think sadly we're always looking to see if the grass is a little bit greener than Aaron Nesmith. Love Nesmith for what he has. He gives you everything he's got. But I do think, yeah, just like you said, he's a little bit undersized, and from like a scoring or two-way standpoint, it's hard to count on him to give you like 15 points per game or more each night. It just feels like he's a good player that would be a really good 6th or 7th man. Could, just like you said, could Jarris Walker develop into that one day starting small forward? Yeah, you hope so if Mathurin can't do it. But in my opinion, that guy probably isn't on the roster. I would love for it to be Mathurin because then it would just work out perfectly. You got him under contract, you got his rights, but he's got to develop defensively before you can just put him in the starting lineup and have Halliburton and Mathurin in that starting lineup, both being subpar defenders. So my guess is that guy is not on the roster right now.
Let's rewind about 25 years ago, Facci, when the Pacers were making Eastern Conference Finals on the regular, making it to the NBA Finals. For a hot minute there, Derek McKee was a starting small forward for a very long time. But they bring Chris Mullin in, and Derek McKee goes to the bench. Then all of a sudden they realize, okay, we like Chris Mullin, but he's getting a little bit older. We got to go to Jalen Rose. And I think that's kind of where the Nesmith spot's going to be at. And I know that's a very different comparison that you don't normally hear, but I'm trying to keep it Pacers related. Derek McKee was a very, very integral part of this team for a long time. They traded Detlef Schrempf away, an all-star, 6th man of the year for Derek McKee, and I thought it was a very win-win trade for both sides because they needed some help defensively. Aaron Nesmith is not as big as Derek McKee was at that 3 spot, but I do think that Derek McKee was such a beloved player from this franchise. Like he still comes to games on the regular, and is just a big part of the Pacers organization still. But there are limitations of what he could do, even though he is beloved. And I kind of feel like that's the same way with Aaron Nesmith. Like, can start for now for some teams that make some runs, but I think that you kind of know your ceiling is limited with that spot there with Nesmith there. And that's not to knock Nesmith. It's just, hey, you know what? Like, we really like you, but you're more probably like a 6th, 7th man that can really help this team go from playoff contender to championship level team. I think he could still be a championship level piece on this team. It's just, I think they need to find something better. And maybe in the next couple of years, like you said, Mathurin could become that Jalen Rose for the Pacers, maybe go out there and do something like that. Or Jarris Walker maybe fits that bill a little bit more because of Jalen's ability to kind of be more of a bigger point guard out there as well, playing with the team that they had. So anyway, not the greatest comparison in terms of like what the Pacers need for this roster compared to what they needed back 25 years ago. But just addressing that small forward spot is huge. And I think that when they traded Jalen Rose, they got Ron Artest, they continued to kind of find the right person there to fill that spot until eventually they kind of ran into a wall when Paul George asked out, and they haven't been able to fill it really since then.
It's crazy when you're talking about someone else filling that role, and then it's like, and after our test, you had Danny Granger really filling that role, and after Granger, you had Paul George filling that role, and it just like went on of just like this really good chain of small forwards.
Yeah.
Pacers, and yeah, it's so true. I mean, it's been kind of a revolving door trying to fill it, ever since. And I don't think that guy's on that roster right now. Yeah, I like the comparison of Derek McKee, Aaron Nesmith. It's just a guy who's going to work really, really hard, but isn't the ideal fit over there when you're going up against a team on the opposing end where their small forward is Jason Tatum. Guys that are wings that are top players in the league. I think Indiana has yet to really fill that spot, but Aaron Nesmith hasn't given them a reason to, or hasn't allowed someone to take his spot yet. So someone's got to take it from him. I respect it, and I hope to say that guy's on this roster with Jarris Walker and Ben Mathurin, but right now I can't confidently say that.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be honest. Derek McKee was guarding the best player in the series. Guarding the Michael Jordans of the league, whatever, what have you. But Aaron Nesmith did the same thing in the Knicks series. He was guarding the best player on New York's team. I'm not saying that Jalen Brunson is Michael Jordan. Before Knicks fans, if they're listening to this, get excited. I'm just saying that he was the best player on the Knicks in that series, and Aaron Nesmith was the best defender for Indiana to guard him. So, like, Derek McKee was the same kind of player. Like, he knew he was really good at one thing and focused in on that. I think Nesmith definitely has more offensive game to him than a guy like McKee, but I feel like everybody in the league now has to have more of an offensive game where you'll get played off the court. So, it's a fun comparison. But Facci, that's going to wrap it up for today's episode. Go ahead and tell everybody where they can find us at on social.
Absolutely. So you can find us on Twitter at PacersPod, STP. You can find Alex on Twitter at AlexGoldenNBA. I can be found on Twitter at _FACCI. You can find us on Instagram at PacersPod, STP. You can find us on Facebook at Setting the Pace. You can find us on TikTok at Setting the Pace. And Alex, tell them where they can check us out on YouTube.
Ladies and gentlemen, go to youtube.com/Setting the Pace, a Pacers podcast. And I want to apologize because I did not get the Chris Scenario episode up there, and I do not think that at this point it is relevant because some of the conversations were about players that we already had signed extensions to and stuff like that and brought back James Johnson. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to put that one up on the YouTube channel. So if you want to listen to that, check it out on the audio platform. But with that being said, follow us, subscribe. You know what to do. Make sure you're on the YouTube page. You're on our podcast page. Don't ever miss an episode of Setting the Pace if you love this show. But Facci, if you're ready to come back tomorrow, or I guess it's 2 days from now, and talk more Pacers, then hit me with those 3 words.
Let's go, Pacers!